Flapper Dames and Flapper Roosters by Freeman Tilden. The Ladies' Home Journal, May 1923. We have been making believe for a long time that the flapper is necessarily a very young person, and that flapperism is a new disease which has attacked only that part of our population which has just about reached the age when human beings first consent to have their faces washed without making a loud outcry. Allowing for overlapping on both sides, you might say the years of late adolescence and early adultness. The fact is that flapperism is confined to no particular age, and that the reason it looks to be typically an affection of the young folks is simply because, being freer and better mixers, they pass it on to each other more readily, like the measles. But flapperism did not originate spontaneously among the younger set. They took to it with all the eagerness with which youth embraces a risky innovation. They made it go. They endowed it with all the pleasanter features which it ever possessed. If you look back beyond the present period and low estate of flapperism, you will recall that the thing was at first made rather likable, because then there was a spirit of adventure and grace about it. But the point is, it was handed to them by their elders. This assertion is, as they say in geometry, to be demonstrated. Perhaps it would be well to consider what flapperism is. It may be the result of an evil germ working on innocent tissue, but I don't think so. It looks to me more like what that old lady who used to be called the grandmother of the Russian Revolution said about Bolshevism. Bolshevism, she declared, is not a theory or system of government. It is just a form of behavior. When you come to think of it, that is a rather neat summing up. By the same token, flapperism looks like a form of behavior, the result of an attitude toward life. And as the younger people of the world don't have any attitude toward life, and it is lucky for them that they don't, this attitude, originated by their elders and so-called betters, was formulated for them and handed down to them. They grasped it eagerly, made it their own, and, with the fine abandon of the scanty-yeared, proceeded to run it wildly into the ground. The world had been leading up to this form of behavior on the part of adults for a long time. Paintings were not any good unless you did not know what they were about. Poetry was not poetry if it had rhyme and meter and lyric loveliness. Government was not any good unless it was in the hands of those who had never had the wit and will to govern themselves. Mothers were outdated and lacked chic. Fidelity and chastity were the badge of the backwoods citizenry. I am putting this bluntly, possibly even a little excessively. But that is just what the insurgent attitude amounted to in the end, and just how, as I see it, the younger folks got insurged into bobbed hair, knee skirts, and a dozen other outbursts of flapperism, including a general demeanor which can best be summed up as extremely bad manners. Not understand that there was anything necessarily evil about many aspects of flapperism on the part of the juveniles. I mean only that this was part of the general attitude that everything must be done in defiance of former style, manners, and taste. I hope it is not irrelevant to say just a word here about insurgents, because if you agree with me that this attitude on the part of the elders was the precursor of what has been called flapperism on the part of the youngsters, it seems worthwhile to observe things at the source. 9 out of 10 insurgents are people who, having failed to achieve anything under the rules of the game because of their laziness, incompetence, or crankiness, are willing to cheat to win. That part of New York City which is known as Greenwich Village is, with certain honorable exceptions, made up of people who, failing to victimize the world into believing that they have anything valid to say with pen or brush or burin or mallet, go shrieking around the 5 boroughs trying to get the rules changed so that they can hold the 5th ace up their sleeves. The worst flappers the world has ever seen are those who are of the age of 40 or over. The old flapper. You know her. You know him. Every thé dansant, every dinner dance, every ocean steamship, every summer and winter resort has a goodly sprinkling of them. Talk about Gertie's bobbed hair and knickers. Why, the most advanced and bumptious juvenile flappers ever seen are cambric tea compared with the older variety. When I was last in New York City, I went to the Sardanapalus Hotel to see the original flapper dame. You understand, of course, what a flapper dame is. A flapper dame is an adult female person who is to the youthful flapper what the regular measles is to the light German form, only more so. A flapper dame is a person who has reached the age of discretion and sobriety without having achieved either the one or the other. A flapper dame has nothing on her mind but her coiffure, and often very little of the genuine about that. She is the mother, or the grandmother, or the stepmother of the flappers. She is the whyness and witchness of flapperism, unless I am mistaken. So I went to the Sardanapalus Hotel. You know, when the Greek writers of comedy wish to indicate a person or place proverbial for pomp and luxury, they called it a Sardanapalus. And this name will serve perhaps better than any other, for this hotel happens to be the last word in exclusiveness and expensiveness. There is a grand dazzle and a flaunting of dollar signs about it. A wise friend of mine tells me that if you scrape the surface, you find a lot of base metal underneath. He says that a good deal of the silverware is like the loving cups which the former Kaiser, William Hohenzollern, used to give his friends, pewter under a thin plate. I don't know about that. What I do know is that the thé dansant and the dinner dances and the Babylon Room and the billionaire grills of the Sardanapalus are world famous among those who desire the least possible value for their money. I wanted to see this phenomenon, the Dowager Empress of the flapper world. I suppose she is the original flapper dame on this side of the ocean. She is, to most of the other flapper dames of the country, a sort of folio first edition. This flapper dame of the Sardanapalus has been dancing since 1914. Oh, naturally she doesn't dance 24 hours a day, but it is notorious among those who visit the Sardanapalus either regularly or occasionally that with a few unimportant exceptions, she has been dancing at every afternoon tea since the year the World War began. I saw the object of my pilgrimage. I wished afterward that I had gone to see the polar bears in Central Park instead. It would have been more appartening. This flapper dame seemed, at the age of 60-odd, to have incorporated into herself all the flapper qualities of face, figure, dress, and manner which have been denounced as the scourge of modern youth. I had seen thousands of flapper dames in the hotels and on the steamships, but I had never seen one before that told the whole story at a glance. They told me a good deal about this particular flapper dame of the Sardanapalus. She has scads of money, of course. She has so many gowns, each one shorter than the other, that she can hardly repeat on any of them. She practically supports a whole crew of lounge lizards, whom she pays for dancing with her. This hotel happens to be a favorite roost for young men who make their living by being dance partners for flapper dames. These young men, who possess everything except brains, are living exponents of the sagacity of Dr. Malthus. Dr. Malthus, you will remember, was the gentleman who maintained that the world had too many people in it. The disheartening thing about the Sardanapalus was not the presence of this dowager flapper dame, however. So far as she was concerned, with her cosmetic makeup and elephantine kittenishness, you could put it down to an individual case of senility. But on this particular afternoon, the place seemed to swarm with grandmother flappers of about the same general persuasion. Unless they were dancing with their grandsons, they must have been indulging in paid dancing partners, the aforesaid lounge lizards. And you couldn't help having an uneasy reflection that there are altogether too many flapper dames flapping their inane way amongst us. You couldn't help remembering that it was the same on the steamship on which you crossed to Europe, and in the European capitals, and in Florida at the resort places, and in the White Mountains. I have been wondering just what is the keynote of the grandmother flapper's inspiration. I hazard a guess that it is ignorant cynicism at bottom. What makes me think that it is hopeless cynicism is the conversation that we hear from flapper dames whenever they do congregate. You can sit among them for a whole evening and hear nothing except the latest exploits of some bootlegger who has ferried another 1,000 bottles of moonshine into the neighborhood, the latest recipes for manufacturing homemade fire water, babbling laments about the impending drought, and the rehearsal of some recently published book of ill-smelling realism which nobody would have ever heard of if some indiscreet, self-appointed censor hadn't tried to have it suppressed. It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder, among other things, what we have a right to expect from the young persons who come in contact with these elderly flappers, and what their imitative version of flapperism is going to be. At least it explains that apparent cynicism on the part of the young girls commonly called flappers. I say apparent cynicism, for it is really only on the surface. Youth can't be cynical, even if it tries. The great difference between the antique flapper dame and the young flapper is that the young flapper is really interested in the world, is really spontaneously eager, ready to try anything because it appears to be the way to find out life. But for drab, sodden, dispirited gaiety, and hard, sour, and acrid joy, you have to go to the grandmother of the flapper, who seems to have only one possible pleasure after cutting adrift from a normal existence, which is the chance of shocking somebody. The desire to achieve a little distinction by doing or looking or saying something shocking is the resort of people who lack any genuine merit. An Englishwoman, sometimes referred to as one of the flapper grandmothers, wrote a book a few years ago which had for its chief attraction the fact that it told all those things about herself which are ordinarily not considered good taste or good manners to reveal. What this woman tried to do in literary form, the flapper dame of one sort or another also tries to put over. It has become so common that it is no longer shocking. Still, as unlovely and meaningless as the grandmother flapper is, it is fair to say that she is not quite so depressing as the elderly flapper of the other sex. Male flappers? Oh yes, indeed. They have the same habitat and the same general characteristics as the old flappers of the once called weaker sex, and they are the deadliest of all. When a woman flaps, she flaps, but when a man flaps, he flops. In dealing with the mature male flapper, or flapper rooster, I will present three types which are pretty familiar to everybody. The youngest of the mature male flappers, or flapper roosters, is probably mature only up as far as his neck. The top of him is a case of retarded development. In this class come the lounge lizard, the sofa sloth, and the couch chameleon, natural history specimens which toil not, neither spin nor lift a productive finger in the workday world. In a good many cases, you can probably look to a fond papa and an idolizing mama as being responsible for this bit of human dereliction. The chances are that papa wanted Freddie to be a gentleman instead of an uncouth toiler in the marts of commerce, and mama considered Freddie an artistic temperament who would have to be handled very carefully or he might collapse. Freddie is the result of this forethought on the part of his parents. You find him at the age of 30 or more, swarming with the rest of the drone world at dances, dinner parties, meetings of the glass-eyed intelligentsia, parlor socialist conventions which begin with a foxtrot, end with a hug whirl, and have petting moments in the middle. And he is the white-haired Freddy when it comes to procuring the necessary alcoholic stimulant for a select party of methyl suicides. You don't know whether to laugh or cry when you see this type of flapper rooster. At all events, what you know for certain is that it isn't going to be any use trying to uplift the Freddys of the flapper world. They are going to be just like that until they die. Nothing can be done for them. Neither medical science, nor psychoanalysis, nor brain surgery is going to avail. All that you can reasonably hope for is that an overdose of their favorite sedative will do the trick someday. The next type of flapper rooster is a more important and interesting exhibit. It is the middle-aged male flapper, who has done some work and even shown some merit in his life, but who has gone in for the jazz thing and let it grow on him. I heard a case in point dealing with these flappers the other day. It seems that there was a convention of businessmen called to discuss a pretty important matter pertaining to this particular business. The delegates came to New York from all over the country, and a serious program of conferences and speeches was planned, at which, to get the best out of it, every delegate would have to apply his mind and his time with thoroughness. It was not to be expected, of course, that there would not be moments of relaxation. There would be theater parties, and there would be lighter moments after dinner. But all in all, it was a serious matter. One of the men who had charge of the program for this convention told me that while most of the delegates came to New York City with an earnest purpose, there was an alarming number of men who could never be found when wanted, except in some place of jazzy joy. They were long on the thé dansant. They did not begrudge a few hours spent with illicit booze and flapper company. But if anything sober and considered was wanted of them, they were too tired. The proportion of these flapper roosters to the whole body was not large, but it was large enough to bespeak the attention of their fellows and make them wonder. These men may not flap very furiously in the smaller cities and towns whence they came, but they are distinctly the flapper type when they get a chance. And the important thing about it is that most of them don't realize what has happened to them. The thing has just oozed into their systems in a subtle way. Anyone who does business in a big city like New York knows the type of middle-aged businessman who has become a flapper of the worst kind. I don't mean the frequenter of what is called the underworld as such, nor the rounders and achronicles, rising at sunset and retiring at sunrise, who have no apparent purpose in life except to go from one all-night restaurant to another and show no visible means of support or exertion. I mean a rather new type of businessman, who, instead of hustling to get his work done and going out to the golf links, or playing tennis, or doing a long spin over the roads in his motor car, now vanishes from the office to some roof garden, where there is an orchestra playing upon instruments that make a peculiar and deranging noise, and can be found flapper roosting with such members of the younger generation as are out of parental control. Looking into one of these jazz palaces the other day, I couldn't help noticing that practically all the flapper roosters present were middle-aged or old men. Their dance partners were a good deal younger than themselves, and evidently not of the most innocent variety, although you could not exactly place them in any definite category. The sight of these flapper roosters, who were mostly pathetically awkward and unbeautiful in their efforts to be joyous, gave me a lot to think of. In the first place, they were well dressed. If it gives us any pleasure to know it, there's no doubt that the American men are the best dressed men in the world, judging from any Occidental standard you choose. There was a corporeally clean look about them too. But their faces, as they danced, showed hardly a sign of whatever pleasure they were feeling. It was almost as though they had been sent out to do this stunt as part of a day's work. The physical contact which is inherent to the modern dance seems to have the effect of making the face of the dancer look extremely bored and miserable. When I say that, I am speaking of these middle-aged specimens. It is quite different with a crowd of the young folks we have been hurling the epithet flapper at. They do get something akin to real joy out of it. It all looked as though these flapper roosters were trying to flee from something. From what? That's the question. What are flappers of this sort trying to get away from? Perhaps from themselves. Perhaps they think that this is the shortcut to that real happiness in life which the old fogies used to think could be gained only by the development of character. Anyway, the middle-aged flapper doesn't seem to get any fun out of it. I asked a man who knows a good deal about these things to explain to me the phenomenon of the flapper rooster, or the middle-aged flapper businessman, the other day. Well, what can you expect in a business age when men have to move so fast, was his reply. The old diversions don't satisfy a nervous system which has been stimulated beyond normal. Such men work at too hot a pace, and this rushing into jazz excesses is the result. That sounds well, but I don't think I subscribe to it. In the first place, the fact that so many men in the business world are doing hard and useful work and do not resort to flapper activities gives the lie to it right away. You hear a good deal about the men who commit excesses, but you naturally don't hear anything about the vast majority of middle-aged men who do their day's work, play a little healthful play, and spend some part of each day in developing their minds and their characters by good reading, good conversation, and the quiet stimulation of learning to know their wives and children better. Besides, any great executive will tell you that the men in his organization who get the most work done, of the most exacting kind, are not the men who have to rush into flapper activities at all. Their diversions are wholesome, well-proportioned, and without being too profound or pedantic about it, are in the best sense self-cultural. I am afraid that this talk about the fast pace at which American people go is too often used as the prop to bolster up a lot of poor work and poor living on the part of the people who don't like to play the game according to the rules. As an excuse for the middle-aged male flapper, I can't see it at all. If the flapper rooster can be reached at all and made to see himself as he is, perhaps it might be by way of appealing to his pride. On that ground, I ask him to have a look at himself. I don't ask any man to retire into the sere and yellow before his time. On the contrary, what we are likely to forget is to wring the utmost of true enjoyment out of life. But I still ask the flapper rooster to go into his closet and take a peep at himself in the mirror, and remember that he is no longer physically or spiritually one of Mr. Booth Tarkington's young 17s. To do this may give him a shock, but it will in the end be a wholesome concussion. When a middle-aged person tries to do those things which were meant for the sole possession of youth, he ought to recall that he is carrying too much weight. He is loaded below his plimsoll mark, and he isn't going to make the speed. He may think that his feet are the feet of Adonis, but balance himself ever so dizzily on his toes as he may, he can't conceal that slight stiffness which the passing years have given him. I don't want to hurt his feelings, but so it was meant to be. The jazz dances and the jazz atmosphere which the flapper rooster cultivates have the net effect of making his lack of suppleness a little more apparent. If he wants to forget that the years are passing, let him consider that this is not the way. I can't advise as to just what is the way, but I know this is not. He doesn't thrill us at all. He makes us laugh sardonically. It isn't only as to dancing. It runs through all those flapper roosters' excesses which are an infringement on the copyright of youth. The gay parties I have attended in the company of these folks are principally remarkable for not being gay at all. They are almost mortuary. But what they do is to set the fool pace for the youngest generation and divert it from its natural course, where it could have some real pleasure. If you want to see the reason for the existence of the flapper as we have been using the word, look at the flapper's elder brother, or even at the flapper's grandfather. Speaking of the flapper's grandfather brings us to the third and last type, the type of elderly flapper rooster who makes you feel something unsweetly akin to pain. I was talking with a professional chaperone at a tremendously big popular dance hall the other day. This was a mighty interesting place, so big that you couldn't hear a voice across it, with perfect floors, 2 brass bands, one of which started the moment the other ceased, and a low price of admission which filled it every night. It was a modern institution indeed. There were several highly skilled chaperones, women with eagle eyes and lightning perceptions who kept things as straight as possible. And as it was a sort of big neighborhood affair, it was certainly not an evil place. But here is what she said. Most of the young men who come in here without partners are a pretty decent sort. I give them an introduction to some nice girls. I can spot the bad ones at once. We just freeze them away. We have a way of making it impossible for them to get any introduction or to introduce themselves to any of the young women. The hardest people we have to deal with are the old flappers. That was just the way she put it, the old flappers. I asked her to explain. Well, I mean these old duffers who have gone dumbbell about dancing and spend all their time trying to get young women to dance with them. Some of them are really dangerous, but a good many are just old fools and pests. Before I came here, I used to be a chaperone in a New Hampshire summer hotel in the hot months and down south in winter for the same proprietors. The old flappers were the bane of my life in both places. I wonder how they get that way. There's one over there. That's the kind I mean. That particular old duffer isn't so bad. He lives just around the corner and comes in every night with his daughter, who is about 50, I think. But so far as looks go, that's the kind. I looked this particular old duffer over, and sure enough, he looked like 100 others you might see in places ranging from a nickel a dance place to the most exclusive hotel tea dance. The mark of the flapper was upon him. He wasn't like Grampy Brown, who just liked to join in the quadrille in the old square dance days for the fun of the thing, until his rheumatiz forced him to quit. This particular old duffer had made the dizzy life his chief regard, so far as you could judge. To do him justice, he cut a better figure than some of the middle-aged fat flapper roosters that you notice perspiring dreadfully and making a sad attempt to gamble. But the atrophied glare of the flapper habitué was in his eyes, and he showed that rather silly face of the person who devotes himself exclusively to sensuous proceedings. Another good place to study flapper dames and flapper roosters is on board one of the great ocean steamships, the kind where you take an elevator to go from deck to deck, and where you are just beginning to get acquainted with a small corner of your own deck when the steward raps on the door and says, "Are you all packed up? We reach Southampton in the morning." If there is a gay party on board, study the ages of the gay ones. If there is a jazz festival, observe the fact that there is a showing of white hair on the heads of the star performers. If there is some gossip flying around, take a memorandum of the age of one of the flappers concerned. see if he doesn't run up beyond what we have called the age of judicial temperament. At the same time, keep a sharp eye on the younger folks, the so-called flappers on board. If you happen to be on a ship where their demeanor is not in general more serious, their fun less hectic, and their manners not better than a large percentage of the older flappers, then indeed you have picked a most remarkable craft to get you across the ocean. And it isn't only the big ships either. I crossed the Atlantic last year on the maiden voyage of what is called a second-class boat, although some of these new second-classers make the old type of luxury ships seem like Cardiff colliers by comparison. This was a Canadian run, and the immigration laws of Canada have become very strict. So the result was that the people in the cabin were of the kind commonly called the best. The poorest, who traveled second class, were mostly the sons and daughters of refined British families whose fortunes had been dented by the war, and were going to Canada to make their way. There were also people of evident wealth, some of social pretensions, and one or two who had a sir or lady as a handle. I have a keen recollection that on this ship, it was not the younger people who splashed the vermilion spots of flapperism, who held the special dinner parties, who gave the orchestra leader a glass arm and a fatigued step with their constant demands for more syncopated music. It wasn't the pretty young girls who got themselves talked about. It certainly wasn't the younger men who wanted the clock stopped so that the frivels could go on indefinitely. And I do recall that one young person had a good deal of a horrid time looking after father. It set me thinking, I'm not here to tell the world that something is the matter with it, or that we are all going to the bow wows. I am not a gloom blower. But I could not help thinking then, and now, that the vicious assaults on flappers and flapperism, meaning the younger set who have been hailed before justice as defying the conventions and wrecking the national life, have been pointed a little bit out of the direction where the truth lies. As for the elderly flapper, I don't know what is going to be done about him, or her. I am not proposing a league for the protection of our elders from themselves, or a society for the rescue of wayward parents. Very likely, the younger generation will take their elders in hand gently but firmly at some not very distant date.